Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries. Hello and welcome to the latest discussion from GIE Media's Manufacturing Group. What's next for EVs? I'm Jake Kaufman, the senior editor for the group. We are thrilled to be joined today by Laurie Harbour, a partner at Wipfli. Wipfli is a top 25 advisory firm with a strong CPA foundation serving 59,000 clients across today's most complex industries. For more than 90 years, they've evolved and grown to help clients take on whatever comes next. Yet, as much as they have changed, at their core, they remain committed to the curiosity of their clients. More than 3,200 associates help clients and services ranging from business consulting and digital services to audit and accounting. Wipfli focuses on emerging and mid-sized market organizations with specialized knowledge in industries such as financial institutions, financial services, manufacturing, distribution, healthcare, construction, real estate, government, nonprofit, agriculture, auto dealerships, and technology. Let's get started. Laurie, thank you so much for your time and your expertise today.
No problem. Thank you, Jake. It's great to be here again. 2 or 3 years in a row, I think, on this fun topic. So good morning, good afternoon to those of you participating in multiple time zones, I'm sure. That was a great introduction of our team at Wipfli. We Harbour Results became part of Wipfli in May of last year, so just prior to doing this event last year. And as Jake outlined, we do a lot of great work in middle market manufacturers, and so a lot of tax and audit, M&A type of activity within our core services, and then a lot of advisory services, which is where the Harbour Results team kind of came in to the organization around performance augmentation and operations, doing our strategic planning, as well as a lot of market intelligence and benchmarking, as well as operational improvement in the shop floor. We also have an automotive practice within our manufacturing, retail, and distribution industry, of which I oversee kind of that automotive focus within our organization. So studying things like electric vehicle and what's going on globally in the automotive market is something we do every day with a team of folks that support me to do that. So today, we want to kind of share with you sort of where we are within this. And as we dive into looking at assessments of companies and operational improvement and strategy, this automotive market intel is so critical to what we do. A lot of people are saying today that automotive is down, and we certainly have not returned to our 18 million units of pre-COVID levels, but at 15.5 to 16 million units, it's still been a very viable market. So as we look to help companies in all these areas, we're trying to bring this market intel into play. And so we're studying it on an ongoing basis. We work with some peers of ours like AFS, Automotive Forecasting, who shares with us a lot of data. And that really is where this breadth of team comes together to bring the information I'm going to share with you today. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the macro update, because it's important what's going on in the economy, what's happening with tariff and trade, and how does that affect our automotive market trends, and then ultimately our battery electric vehicle trends, and then sort of wrap up with kind of what we see as the future in this space and what companies can do to position themselves in this space. So let's dive into the macro update. I think probably the number one thing that everybody continues to talk to me about is this issue of planning your business around the level of uncertainty that comes with tariff and trade. I'm sure many of you kind of feel like this, that this is like throwing a dart at a dartboard that's constantly moving, and we have no idea where to throw the dart. So estimating kind of how the impact is on your business, how the impact is on your customer's business, and what that plays into not only the global scale of automotive, but then as we bring it back to home in North America, how will this impact USMCA, and how will it affect our business and the OEMs and prices for consumers and all of the things that are associated with that. So when we look at tariffs today, I mean, our team is tracking this on a daily basis, but as you know, it changes very consistently. There was a lot of effort to announce on Liberation Day some significant changes. Of course, as you know, that all went into negotiation, and over 200 countries, we have about 8 trade deals today. So fast forward from April, we still have not gotten into a level of certainty. China, of course, had a big day planned for yesterday, and that got postponed again until October and November timeframe. So these are the numbers that we see in today's market with some of the deals that have been negotiated or are currently being negotiated, like the situation with India, but lots of others. I mean, the average is probably about 18%. We can show you here on the next slide, but a lot of uniqueness as we look at some of these, right? So you've got issues around raw materials. When we think about Mexico and Canada, raw materials, steel, aluminum, copper, how does that impact us crossing the border just, through Detroit into Windsor, down in Texas into Mexico? And then ultimately, how do we transform any kind of thing that we might buy into Canada or Mexico and then move to the US? Does it come across under USMCA and so on and so on? So there's so much movement and so much activity that probably the number one thing we hear is just uncertainty in how to run our business. How do we know what's happening? How do we dedicate time to study it? And it really is something that each company needs to know and understand and study. You will get a copy of this deck, by the way, and we do have some additional information that we can share with you about tariff and trade. But there's definitely a lot of things that have to be looked at and watched as we impact the automotive industry, as we bring cars in from some of these countries like Germany and the EU that will now see a tariff they hadn't seen before. So, with all that, when you look across sort of the US average tariff rate today, it's about 18%. And you can see going back in history and lots of discussion, lots of debate about duties that have been incurred over the years, things that we have not been tariffing, although other countries have been putting tariffs on us. So you can see kind of that, situation as it has changed through time. And again, consistently changes, but across all countries, it's at about 18%. So when you look at kind of where manufacturing sits today, and we just completed our annual benchmarking study, it's now being released to all of the associations in the market. We have a press release here coming in a couple weeks. We look at the data and information, and what we're seeing is that everybody is kind of stuck in this, what I call wait to see mode, right? And what's going to happen. And that's sort of paralyzing us to make decisions. A year ago, if we sat here, we were all waiting to see who our president was going to be. We didn't know what that impact would be and what would change about policy. So now we know what that is. As we fast forward into the early 2025, of course, we saw a whole litany of these tariffs come into play, all while we're sitting on a weakened economy. Not an implication that the new administration drove that. Obviously, the economy was weakening as we came out of COVID and had that boom and then sort of slow down. So the economy is a challenge when we look specifically at manufacturing and durable goods demand and discretionary purchases like RVs and boats and things that are not, we don't have quite as much cash to pay for today that we used to. What that has driven for manufacturers is sort of a lack of capital investment, not knowing where tariffs would be out of the country on buying my piece of equipment, not knowing what's happening in the economy. We saw in our data that we'll release here in a couple weeks that the expected capital investment for this calendar year is about half of what it was last year. So people are rethinking kind of, what they should work on and what their focus should be. So that uncertainty has just caused a lot of constancy of change within organizations. You've, of course, got still very high interest rates, which are affecting, the situation with unemployment and inflation to reduce the demand for some of those durable goods. And that demand is really across the board. It really doesn't matter what industry I look at today, with the exception of maybe some pockets like data centers that we're building. And again, automotive is at 16 million units, but even medical is down, 10 to 15%, depending on what industries that we're in. So almost across the board, we're seeing just a softness at the top line for most manufacturers. That combined with this wait and see mode is creating some challenges. If we look at the actual demand and the growth rate of new orders or durable goods demand, we are starting to see some of that trend forward. Of course, when COVID hit, if you look to the far right here on this graph, we obviously had a major drop in durable goods demand, and then it drove up tremendously in 2021. We had the chip shortage and other supply chain issues that brought us down. And when we were looking at the back half of 24, demand was pretty low. And now we're starting to see things tick up a little bit. I'm still relatively bullish that by next year the economy will see some positive turn, but we're depleting some inventories. Big manufacturers like John Deere and Polaris and others said, "Hey, we built too much inventory in that 22, 23, 24 timeframe," and so we were draining inventory, which is what impacted a lot of the middle market companies here in the last 6 to 12 months. But the other thing that shows up in that depletion of inventory is just when we look at utilization. So, we have hundreds of companies that provide data to us on an annual basis, and in capacity, we collect it quarterly. So you can see the trend in the bright blue line is actual utilization of production based on a 5-day, 24-hour capacity calculation. The dotted line is what they forecast it to be. So many companies believe that, the back half of 24 and into 25, things were going to pick up along with the new administration. You can see we were at a very high level of utilization in Q3 and Q4 last year, and it has come down 15 points in the first and second quarter of 2025. As I travel, I've already visited 9 companies this week on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday as I'm here in Wisconsin. Many of them are telling me they're down anywhere between 10 and 40% at the top line in terms of overall revenue, which is impacting that utilization. So when we look at what's happening in the sort of the sentiment and the feeling of the market today, it's really very soft, and companies are beginning to really try to figure out what we do with the staff and the labor that we keep. So in our manufacturing study that we'll be releasing, we also go through the first, what we call a pulse study, in the first 6 months of this year. So our annual study is based on 24 calendar year. This data here is based on the first 6 months. So we asked people about utilization. You can see that 15-point drop that I talked about on the previous slide in terms of all manufacturing. This could be a stamper, a molder, a die caster, an assembler, anyone who's participated in our study. We also look at efficiency, so value-added revenue per employee. The concept here is that the more we can do with the same amount of people, the more efficient we are, which is linked to the profitability side of it. Average value-added revenue per employee is about $140,000 per employee, down slightly, not dramatically. So this tells me that we're still doing things relatively efficiently, but the profit targets are down. We're seeing drops in profit because costs have gone up so substantially, whether it's labor or supplies, it's a challenge. And you can see the top concerns. People are worried about the raw material tariff. They're worried about high cost and inflation. Now, the concern for me is when you look at knowing profits are down, knowing revenue is down, we're seeing that people are holding on to labor. So 65% of the population said that revenue is going to be down or flat, and 88% said the profits will be down or flat. But 75% of the population is either holding steady on labor or they're hiring. So the challenge here, just from a pure math standpoint, is that eventually we're going to start to see profits continue to drop because we're not right-sizing our business. It kind of goes along with the wait and see approach. We're waiting to see for volume to come back, and the question is, how long do we wait before we start to right-size our business from a people standpoint? So that's sort of the state of where we are from an economic standpoint. Obviously, there's a lot we can dive into about the economy and tariff and trade, and we could talk to you separately about that. But I wanted to kind of move into automotive and what we're seeing in the effect in the industry. So if we look just at pure sales at the U.S. level, again, we were at 17 and a half, approaching upon 18 as we went into sort of this COVID situation in 2020. Of course, those dropped dramatically. We reached pretty much 16 million unit mark last year, and now this year we're looking at probably comparable, somewhere close to 16, maybe 15 and a half, depending on, kind of what we see in the back half of the year. So if there's more tariff impact, if we see, some drop in sales because of vehicles that may have a higher tariff on them. But as you've seen in a lot of the reports from the media, that a lot of the OEMs are sort of eating some of that tariff implication in order to continue to produce product in their plants and to move, sales throughout the market. So as we look at the U.S. space, will be close to 16 million units, maybe a little less. We're seeing about 1.8 million in Canada and about 1.5 million in Mexico. So again, not a bad automotive environment, but certainly not the 18 million that many suppliers were used to. A couple things that we're also looking at. If you recall, I mean, just a couple years back when you might have heard me speak on this topic, when we were in 21, we were at record low inventory levels. You couldn't go and get a vehicle off of the dealer lot. You couldn't even test drive one. We were selling them at very high prices. We were making a lot of money. Now, of course, that has crept back into our space. We had reached almost our pre-COVID levels at almost 90 days of vehicle inventory. And then all of a sudden, when the tariffs came and there was this Mexico and Canada tariff and the impact there, a lot of people went off and bought vehicles off the dealer lot in order to get that pre-tariff product. So we dropped again, and now we're back up again to a level of about 82 days. But probably more significant is when you look, and I know this is an incredible eye chart, but again, you'll get this deck. But the emphasis I want to make here is we have a lot of vehicles over and above that average of 70 days and some products that are sitting out in the marketplace and in an interesting position. So for example, the Ford Escape is the highest, 143 days of inventory. And you may have heard the announcement earlier this week from Ford that they will be ending production of the Escape in Louisville and converting that into their new battery electric vehicle assembly plant, and then that product will move to an EV in the future. So some of these products are not selling quite as well, and they're in a very heavily populated area, sort of small CUV, small SUV type products. A lot of models, a lot of trim levels, a Hyundai, a Kia, a Ford, a Mazda. So it's a very crowded space that we will likely see some reduction of some of that model count as we move forward, where other products like Toyota are very low in inventory. So there's a very different mix as you look at the market today compared to where we might have sat when we had very little inventory. Of course, average age continues to increase. We are up to about a total on the car side of almost 15 years. Trucks are continuing to age, which brings us to a combined level of about 12 years. So this is a good bad scenario, right? In that we've got a lot of older vehicles entering the used car market, making it more affordable, which means we also need to turn over a new product. And so there's positivity in that. Now you can see that we're also starting to see some ages increase in things like hybrid and battery electric. Certainly battery electric much, much lower, but we're seeing, an average age, but much lower than our ICE product. So this is something that will continue to drive car sales and will support the used car market. And in a time when it's frankly critical, because if you look at average car prices, I mean, they have gone up just dramatically in 15 years. When you think of all the CAFE regulations and the technology we've added to product, when we hit COVID, the price of vehicles was somewhere just under 40,000. And in this 5-year period of time, we're now just under 50,000 in price. And you can see it obviously gets offset by this large quantity of incentives that goes in the market. It's true that interest rates are high and it's expensive to buy a car, but there's also a lot of dealers and incentives out there that are making it, a little more affordable, and low interest rates and expanded lease timeframes and things of that nature. But it's still a very expensive purchase for a household. The average household needs to make about 150,000 to afford some of these new vehicles that are much higher than 49,000 as you look at some of these high contented trucks and SUVs. Now, a little bit of a busy chart, but this is the profit per vehicle that we see for the major OEMs, and it is finally starting to soften. Through COVID, again, we were selling high contented product and making a lot of money per vehicle. Now, GM, Ford, and Chrysler are still making good money. Chrysler is definitely seeing an impact in this first half of the year and first quarter of this calendar year. You saw Ford announced, major reductions in profitability just a couple weeks ago, but they're still making a fair amount of profit per vehicle. Now, for Stellantis, it's quite the flip from 8,000, almost 8,000 a vehicle, to losing money in this Q2 of calendar year 25. As we look at some of the Japanese manufacturers, lower on an average profit per vehicle basis. Remember, their mix is a higher content of cars than trucks. Even if you compare a Tundra to a Ford F-150 or a General Motors product, it's a lower price point. And then companies like Nissan are in massive restructuring and closing a couple plants in Mexico and reevaluating what they're doing in Europe as well, and in Japan. The European manufacturers, of course, sell, higher priced vehicles at a lower level of volume, with the exception of Volkswagen. And then, of course, Tesla making money on vehicles, but down quite a bit from where they were, given some of the softness on the EV side. So still making money on reduced volume. The box you see here at the top is a reduction in volume, with the exception of General Motors. So selling less units, making a fair amount of money, which has been able to fund some of their future development. Now, just a quick slide on the impact of tariffs. A lot of this discussion as they release their results. You can see the bright blue is 2025 Q2 tariff impact calculation that we've developed based on feedback from the OEMs. And then the gray bar would be what we anticipate for the whole calendar year of 25. So the bars are the actual dollar impact. So General Motors says, hey, we're going to see about a $4.5 billion impact in the calendar year. We have then translated that into what will it do to profit per vehicle. So if in fact they see $4.5 billion worth of impact from a tariff, or Toyota sees 6.7 billion, you can see the impact on a profit per vehicle basis is well over $1,000 for every vehicle that they sell in the marketplace. So that will dramatically change the numbers I showed on the previous slide as we, step forward into some of these markets and look at the impact, which is why they're debating about how much of this do I eat versus how much of this do I pass on to the consumer. So these profits will start to affect future design, future engineering, future products. And it's why you're seeing some of the announcements like Ford did to change the assembly process for EVs to try to take capital out and improve their overall cost structure so that they can ultimately make money on these products. So let's talk about battery electric vehicle. There's definitely a shift and a slowdown in overall production and sales that we've seen. If I were to go back 2 or 3 years with our work with AFS forecasting, Joe McCabe and his team would have been a little more bullish about what was happening in the battery electric vehicle space. Of course, now they've readjusted some of that down. And as you look across this sort of busy chart, you see battery electric, hybrid, and ICE. So certainly still production planned in the battery electric vehicle space. A lot more we're seeing in hybrid, but still a reduction of ICE product. And that overall electrified share, meaning it could be a hybrid, a PVEV, whatever it is, combined with battery electric vehicle, is still expected to be quite high, over 60%, as we get out to 2032 from a production standpoint. So lots of plans in place. Certainly some have been pulled back, and lots of delays in that electric vehicle new program, work. But it's still happening. It's just happening at a slower pace than anticipated. If we look at the U.S. sales projection for battery electric vehicles, again, dramatically lower. I think the team at AFS was probably closer to 30% on the sales side, going back 3-4 years from now out to 2032. Now we're looking at something closer to about 19% of the overall market share. And you can kind of see the units here as we look across that. This adoption curve, continues to be a challenge, whether it's because of fuel economy or cost of the product. There's just a lot of reasons why we see this slowdown. So still planning to produce more than what we are seeing from an overall sales perspective. And really that's across any industry, quite frankly. I was at a plant this morning that supports Harley Davidson, and they produce for their electric product, but it's only about 4,000 units a year, right? So much less than they may have planned several years ago when they were thinking about this. So just that adoption, struggle that we're seeing in the market. If you look at overall electrified powertrain production, again, still growing. So you see ICE shrinking. However, Again, since we spoke a year ago, lots of new investment that's coming for ICE product, new engines for General Motors, some changes on powertrain. So as you move forward out to 2032, we expect that about 62% of the light vehicle production, that it has an electrified powertrain. So that's quite a substantial amount, but yet a lot of hybrid and PVEV coming that will be within that 62%. So we're definitely seeing a lot of shift to hybrid, which is part of the delay in new product development. Is maybe it was planned as a BEV, now they're going to make it a hybrid. So some of that we'll see in some of the launch data here. So last year, I talked with this group and shared that we had about 140, 150 new products coming that were 100% battery electric vehicle. That number has come down now to about 124 by the end of this decade. So, 70 new nameplates from 44 different brands into the marketplace. So again, still coming, but this chart for 23 and 24 was much higher. We would have been closer to 70 or 80 if I showed you this chart 4 or 5 years ago versus where it is today. A lot of new product development that was supposed to launch in this calendar year or next year or the year after has been pushed to the very end of the decade. So still coming, some changes or cancellations that we've definitely seen, but there's still a fair amount of new product that we expect by the turn of the decade here. So again, I've shared this before. I mean, we really are at, in any market that you might study with a new product, whether it's, the invention of the washer and dryer or the invention of a battery electric vehicle, you kind of got this whole series of innovators and early adopters that dove into this. They bought a Tesla, they tried other products from OEMs, and now we're kind of sitting in this market where as we see a slower adoption in the next 10 years, we're kind of at a chasm. How do we make them at a price point that makes sense? Again, part of Ford's announcement earlier this week, let's sell a $30,000 price point electric vehicle versus $130,000. So being able to get the price point where we needed to, and then of course the infrastructure and the systems we need to be able to charge these, and then if we go to hybrid, how do we kind of get people excited about battery electric through a hybrid approach that then will turn into our early and late majority as we go through the period of the next several years and decade. So when you look at this OEM electrified status, everybody has a different approach. I don't know that there's one company that I would say is knocking the cover off the ball as the leader in any of the space. Green being that sort of early adopter, whereas a bunch of people in yellow are developing this, and then people that are behind the curve, right? So fuel cell was a huge conversation many, many years ago, particularly with the Japanese. You can see that Japanese have continued that development, whereas most people have kind of stayed away from that and focused on the BEV part of the business. But it doesn't really matter which OEM you look at, their strategies are all different. Ford has been a little quieter in developing a lot of these things, but General Motors, of course, went all in with battery electric product and has pulled back some of that in the last 12 to 18 months. Stellantis, of course, was behind for quite some years and then purchased by Peugeot Citroën, has made some changes. Toyota, of course, sort of stayed away from battery electric vehicle with one or two very simple products and is focused on hybrid, which is now starting to show that in many ways they have an advantage over others. Honda kind of all over the map. And so as you walk through this chart, you can see that many companies sort of went in on battery electric vehicles, some in hybrid, and now we're kind of backtracking and doing some of that hybrid or adaptation of the battery electric. The three who are manufacturing in this country today, Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, of course, are all battery electric product with not a lot of opportunity or thought to move backwards to a hybrid. So as you look at that startup environment, again, Tesla sort of being very safe at this point. Yes, lots of controversy and discussion and slow volume, Texas plant Mexico plant not moving as quickly as they had anticipated, but still safe and profitable and making money. Rivian sort of sees a very positive outlook, a lot of movement of more delivery trucks, which is a great place for battery electric product, and not just Amazon, but now has the ability to sell to others, given that they're no longer in exclusivity. Lucid is doing okay, sort of moderate, but very low volume, very high price type of product. But now you have a bunch of new folks that are moved into that kind of moderate category. Lots of discussion of Slate and Karma still doing their thing. Tello kind of new to this environment. And then as you look to the left, you see either those who have gone out of business or those who are still, feeling in a very troubled space and not moving forward. And then you have those legacy OEMs that have created new brands, a Scout for Volkswagen, a Polestar for Volvo. So as we look at this, we're still watching these startup companies very closely. Some will make it, some will continue to not make it. But as new products are launched by our traditional OEMs, they will put continued pressure on some of these startup companies in the marketplace. So where to from here on the battery electric space? BEVs again are still going to be launched into this market, although kind of stretching out that forecast in a slower pace than what we had anticipated. Of course, with the new administration, that BEV tax credit goes away here shortly. So there is an anticipated bit of a bump before that goes away here shortly. That some of the product that's on the market you may see that sell here, but it will ultimately could have an impact on the BEV product moving forward. Probably a little more so as we create lower cost product. Probably not as much impact of the credit when you're buying $120,000 BEV, but still something to think about. The cost of BEVs will continue to decline and will become more affordable. If I just take a curve here for a second and talk about the Ford announcement, Tesla few months back, 6 months or so, reinvented their manufacturing process. And as many of you know, and I shared last year on this webinar, that they've moved to a die cast environment, 2 or 3 major components making up the infrastructure of the vehicle itself, the platform, and then obviously the stampings and moldings that we attach to the vehicle. Very much a Tesla sort of paving the way on that, reduction of capital on the stamping side, in the body shop, and all areas of the business to be able to create low volume and put these vehicles out. So after Tesla's moved to that many years ago, a lot of OEMs purchased die casting machines and started doing this R&D. So now Ford has made this announcement to change their assembly process within electric vehicles, starting in that Louisville plant where they currently make the Escape. So they'll end the Escape. They'll start with this mid-sized truck, which is essentially the new Maverick in an EV product, and they will change this entire assembly process to take out cost, and they will use 2 or 3 die casting components as well. So the goal is ultimately to get to a $20,000 or $30,000 battery electric vehicle. So very interesting, and some are doing similar things. You may have seen a month or so ago, Toyota also announced a change to their assembly process. So all of this is in the effort to reduce manufacturing cost and labor to be able to put out, lower priced vehicles and continue to sell. So as these OEMs start to shift their focus, we will see a little less of the core segment of battery electric vehicle nameplates. We're going to see some reduction in that CUV space that where it's heavily populated, a huge reduction in trim levels, instead of maybe 5 different lighting systems to choose from, maybe it's 2 or 3, or, features in the vehicle, all in the vein of trying to reduce the cost of the product and be able to allow for more sales as we move into more hybrid and battery electric vehicles. As we look forward in the horizon, no one can tell, right? The battery electric slowdown is not all about politics by any stretch of the imagination. It's about cost and adoption and all of those things. And so we may see, if an administration changes post 2030, we may see the Democrats go back to fuel economy targets and work to try to get more of this BEV space out there. So no one knows, right? But the OEMs will continue in this development because it's a global initiative. So we don't expect it to go away. We just expect it to take longer to get to where we might have thought. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about the future as we look forward. Many of you know that I in my team study what's called the automotive tooling market. And the reason we study the tooling market is because tooling is the indicator to the future of the automotive industry. What new products are coming out, what models are being launched. So I just wanted to kind of show you this trend in automotive tooling. We have a very robust process. We work with AFS to get the data. We work with the OEMs to see how much they're spending on tooling based on their designs, and we develop this forecast for tool makers, but also for production suppliers that are looking for new work. If we went out to when we started doing this back in the early 2012, 13 timeframe, this industry of automotive tooling was doing 7, 8, 9, 10 billion on an ongoing basis. Coming out of the recession of 08, 09, and 10, new products got developed, and we had this big boom in 16 through really 2019. A lot of new products, all those new SUVs and CUVs we talked about. So big, big years, 150 models. Then, of course, they kind of took a pause in 2020. Numbers dropped through the floor. Tool shops were really slow in 20 and 21. And most people thought it was COVID, but it really was about a product development turn. We were inventing battery electric vehicles. We were starting to launch them slowly. But as you can see from this chart, the automotive tooling market has just slowed tremendously. It's, 6 billion at the top end, even as I look out to the back half of the decade. Some of that is because we postponed a lot of programs. A lot of vehicles were supposed to launch in for new tooling in 24, 25, 26, and those all moved back about 3 or 4 years because they were largely battery electric vehicles. So now redesigning, making hybrids, well, I couldn't just put a new vehicle in its place. And now we're starting to see more freshening of ICE product, more hybrids, some trim reduction, which will all affect tool spend, reducing it, but we will start to see some new models. Frankly, we'll have to reinvent and freshen some of our ICE product because some of them are getting pretty long in the tooth. If you go to a Chevy dealer, that Suburban probably looks about the same as it did 6 years ago. And so they need to start to freshen some of these products. And the truck cycle, the Stellantis, the Ram, the F-150 and the GM trucks are always a big push in the market, new products for suppliers, for tools, and that's what's coming towards the back half of the decade. There's some freshening between that and then some new products. So it's likely not going to return to the same amount of glory, which means less parts and less available new business, but we will start to see some of that, turn. Again, the battery electric product was what we anticipated. So I asked my team to kind of show me what was it a year or two ago and what is it now. And you can see that original spend that was planned last year and this year dropped dramatically when everything sort of got pushed backwards. So now you see 26 a little higher than it was planned in the prior year, and 27 a little higher, and 28 and 29 are even higher. So we just had this sort of, I hate to use the word chasm again, but it was what we showed in the previous chart where we just we didn't launch them when anticipated and decided to do some redesign. So again, they will come, but it will just take a little bit more time as we move forward. So I want to just sort of wrap up with kind of what I'm calling our manufacturers, kind of call to action. As you look at the market data and you look at all of the economic and tariff implications, there's just no more ability to wait and see what will happen. We have to act on and control the things that we control in our manufacturing environment. So there's just 5 things I want to kind of talk about. This whole issue of gathering your data and studying what's going on in tax and tariff. I mean, obviously the big beautiful bill has created some very good positive manufacturing things. So, talk to your accounting firm. And we have a whole team at Wipfli that is counseling our manufacturing clients on how to take advantage of the changes in the tax bill. So if you're uncertain or you don't have the right, advisor there, let us know. We can help in that. We're also tracking tariff and trade, and we're offering those services to our clients. And, what is your HTS code? Do you need to make a make-buy decision? Should you move or reshore that product? But then it goes beyond that. What is your operating data telling you? What is your sales data telling you? What's your labor data telling you? Know your data so you can make those informed decisions. And nobody controls that data but you. So we have to get inside of that. I may not control the tariff, but I got to know it and know how to react and make a decision on it. So we really need to dedicate some folks to studying this data, understanding it so that we can use the data to make informed decisions. Secondly is back on this tax implication. There are some very positive things that came from the bill. There's also some things within tariff and trade that will, in some cases, reverse some of that, right? So we need to understand both sides of it and know what the impact is on your margin as you look at these tax implications. Do the planning. If you're looking at succession planning and potentially selling your business, again, all those discussions need to play a role. And in fact, there's some very significant benefit with R&D tax credit. So we're going through and redoing people's, refiling their taxes to take advantage of that R&D tax credit that's come back. Thirdly, we've got to map our supply chain. I don't care if you're a $10 million molder or if you're a $1 billion manufacturer of bumper fascias for General Motors and Ford. We need to know where our supply chain is. Where do we get everything all the way down to the raw materials? Some of that, if you're in the die casting or forging space, if we don't know where our metal is smelted and poured and we put unknown on that tariff, that customs document, they will charge you 200%, which is the Russian tax rate. So we have to understand those things, know where our supply chain is, know what our HTS codes are, know where you're at risk. There's a whole new team put together from the DOJ to look at tariff fraud. And so understand those things and know where your risk points are. That's critical in any business. And then the last two pieces really focus on that area that you can control the most. Is we've got to put a focus on sales process. We've brought in a whole team of sales experts that are working with me on sales process consulting, because as we have salespeople who are getting older and COVID has allowed us to sell virtually, we're losing sales. We're not winning quotes because we're too high priced, because we're doing a cost plus model versus what a market will bear. So we're doing workshops on costing and quoting. We're helping put sales processes in place. We're doing market studies. I had a client say to me this week, hey, I really want to go into this market, but I don't know how to get into it. So we're doing a market study and helping them understand where's the strengths, where's the pros, the cons, how do you break into that market? Who do you play? Who do you go after? So understand sales process and put a new focus on sales, because most companies today are telling me they're down 10 to 40%, depending on where they are in the market. Lastly is the operation side. So if the sales focus is kind of that demand revenue side, operational efficiency, this is that supply side, being able to execute on the sales you have. As I go into plants today that are down at 40% utilization, I'm seeing an incredible amount of waste that has crept into their business. Not as urgent to keep things clean and scheduled effectively, or uptime on machines. And so we have to work on operational efficiency. We can't just work on price, right? We can't just go after a reduction of price. We have to block and tackle, solve problems on the shop floor, reduce our lead times. What aspect of a digital strategy do you need? Does AI work for you? And if so, where? How are you using your ERP system? Do you have Power BI dashboards that are delivering data to you in a way that help you to be more effective? These are critical factors, because if I go and I choose to chase sales in a different way, maybe not cost plus, but maybe, hey, the market's only going to bear $1.20 and I'm at $1.30. I want to take it for $1.20, and I want to work with operations to figure out how we make money on that part. So there's a lot of opportunity there. We're seeing transfer work. I'm not going to tell you I'm seeing a lot of reshoring. There's some, but it's not a huge wave of reshoring. So how do we control the things we do? How do we stop being in the wait and see mode and take our call to action to go make things happen in our business? To us, these are the 5 most critical factors, and we're helping our manufacturing clients in every one of these areas, and have seen some really amazing things in the last 6 months when we just put the focus in the area of the most significant weakness. So those are the key things I wanted to share with you today. I think we've got about 15 minutes or so for Q&A. Again, we do this annual benchmarking study with all of you are welcome to participate in. Our platform is called Harbour IQ, and it's powered by our Wipfli team and resources. We have a tremendous amount of partners that we work with that really help us to be better in what we're doing and work with a lot of different associations. So we're doing the benchmarking for most of these associations. We're doing on-site assessments with many of their members and really helping them to improve their overall business. So I just like to acknowledge our partners because they're so critical to what we do. So I think at this point I would turn it back over to you, Jake, and we can do some Q&A.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Laurie Harbour, for that presentation. Obviously, plenty of great information, but we do have a few questions. Looks like we do have people wondering about the Ford new manufacturing plan. Is that something that came as a surprise to you? And also, do you see more companies kind of following their lead?
Not a surprise. I believed when we saw a significant delay in some of their programs that they were working to reinvent things. And
Mhm.
they were actually one of the first traditional OEMs to buy some of those die casting machines and
Mhm.
take a step into some of that R&D down in Dearborn, and really kind of see where that fits in. I think the thing that probably surprised me the most was they built this beautiful Oval City plant in Memphis.
Mhm.
And I would have thought that that would have been where they might have centralized their electric vehicle production. So now we're kind of taking another ICE plant out of production on a vehicle that, I mean, frankly, the Escape and the Bronco Sport are really the only two vehicles they have in that space, right?
Mhm.
So they'll be ending production there and turning it into an EV a year or two later. So that's probably the only surprise was what are we doing with Oval City? I know we're making a Lightning there and there's future products planned, but that plant's been, I mean, a lot of money poured
Right.
into that facility.
Yeah.
So I do think you'll see some movement by other OEMs as well. Lots of them are investigating this die cast approach. It removes
Mhm.
stamping dies, it removes weld assemblies, it reduces the size of the body shop. The change to this sort of tree concept, which is very
Mhm.
similar but slightly different to Tesla's approach, is that I can have a modular build, right? I can build a rear end of a vehicle or a front end of the vehicle, and then I can pick based on customer demand and bring them in. So it really changes the traditional Ford assembly line that was
Right.
created. So I think you'll see more of it, but I think it will be different types of R&D. Of course, Toyota's approach completely different in what they announced a month ago, right? They will have more flexibility for multiple platforms, both BEV, hybrid, and ICE, but not using the die-cast approach. That they're not necessarily sold on that, right? So
Mhm.
you'll see a lot of change, I believe, in the next 10 to 20 years by all the OEMs.
Awesome. So yes, we have time for a few more questions too for Lori, so you can ask them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Looks like Terry wants to know if you are a supplier in the BEV supply chain, how would you prepare for the uncertainty of the business?
Well, I mean, it really does go back to that last slide that I created. The challenge is we all sort of prepped ourselves in the last 10 years to start making electric vehicle parts, go after that, anticipated demand,
Mhm.
and now it's super slow. So from a manufacturing environment, again, I recently just in some plants that are doing very low volume electric vehicle parts and very high volume ICE product. And they're struggling with how do I make those in the same pieces of equipment and how do I run that sort of high volume, low mix and low volume, high mix model in the same assets, right? It really comes down to that data in what the data tells us about how we plan our scheduling. If somebody's building 4,000 electric vehicles a year, am I going to run 100 a week of those parts, or am I going to build all 4,500 and put them in inventory to improve my
Right.
efficiency, but reduce my, it obviously increases my inventory. Now, I'm not implying you can build them all. Maybe you would build
Right.
3 months in a row or 6 months in a row, right? So you have to reinvent your own thinking on what we call on our team swim lanes, right? And swim lanes being,
Hmm.
if you've ever watched an Olympic swim, match, right? We put the fast swimmers in the middle and we put the slow swimmers on the outside. So it's really being able to schedule and manage your business. And the other big thing that goes with the uncertainty is the communication. Constantly be a crawl in your customer side to know what's coming, what's happening, what are the changes. Because what you don't want to see is, oh, hey, we don't need any more. We have enough inventory, right? So we've got to stay in
Hmm.
that communication to try to mitigate the uncertainty. Unfortunately, it won't go away completely.
Right. Awesome. Looks like Steve is wondering, what do you see as far as vehicle pricing in the future? Do you see it increasing or decreasing?
I would say that if I look just for a second at battery electric vehicles, I think
Mm.
you're going to see that decrease as we get better at manufacturing them, reduction of trim levels and things that make sense, right? We've got to get, you've got these competitors in BYD that are launching, $15,000 battery electric vehicles. Now, it might be a very small box that you sit in, but it's still a cheaper product. So
Mhm.
we have to bring the price down of those. I don't see our high contented ICE product reducing in price much at all.
Mhm.
Somebody who is intent on buying a Cadillac Escalade isn't worried that it's 100 or 120,000, right? Now
Yeah.
I'm generalizing, but the consumer that can afford that is making enough money to not have that be a major issue for them. So I think in today's environment, the mix of high contented product we sell is pretty high, which is why you see that used car market so busy
Yeah.
because now they can buy something at a lower price point. So I think our traditional product stays in that 48 to $52,000 range as you move
Mhm.
forward. But I think individual products start to decline and it's kind of why I'm worried about the Escape, taking a pause because I need
Yeah.
that low volume product that somebody's going to go buy, or sorry, that low price product that somebody's going to
Yeah.
go buy. So, but I don't think it's going to go back to 30 by any
No,
stretch.
except for the new Ford electric truck. That will
Right,
be 30,000.
right,
So,
right.
um,
Similar to what they said about the Lightning, if you recall, when it
yes,
came out.
yeah. The budget electric truck for those out there. I
Right.
do have a question personally. I know when we were starting to cover the electric vehicle market, it seemed like there were so many new startup companies with their innovations, and then it seemed like a lot of the bigger companies would come in and acquire that technology. Are you still seeing as many mergers and acquisitions as far as the innovations, or since the government backing is kind of dried up, do you think that also the amount of innovation in the electric vehicle market will kind of dry up as well?
I think it will dry up. I think there's a lot of R&D going on today, and frankly, into other areas of fuel cell and hydrogen as well,
Hmm.
right? So we haven't even gotten a foothold on battery electric vehicle, but a lot of people are looking at those other alternative, technologies. So I don't think innovation dies, but I do think that there's a potential of consolidation.
Hmm.
We have lost some of that, DOE funding that went to some of those startups like Tesla and Rivian and Lucid in the beginning. Um, so as you look at some of those that I showed on the chart that were on the left that are
Hmm.
troubled and things of that nature, I think you may see some consolidation. You may see some acquisition by some of the traditional OEMs of some of those startups that, have an impact. Um, i- i- Even more so if we start to really see hybrid take off.
Hmm.
I got the chance to drive in a Toyota Sequoia. I'm not advertising for Toyota, but I was on a long trip. I mean, we rode battery, we kicked over to gas, we went and got gas, we went and charged the battery. So I mean, there's something to be said, and yet you have a very large truck with all the features that make sense.
Yeah.
So it took away sort of for me the range anxiety
Yeah.
concept or the lack of time to stop and charge for a half an hour. So if you see a little more hybrid growth when I've got a Tesla and a Rivian that aren't hybrid, that that could create some
Mhm.
challenges. Now, Rivian has a bit of an advantage because where they're really doing well is I mean, there's not, I don't know that there's an Amazon truck that's ICE anymore, right? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure there is. I'm sure there is, but I see them, they come to my house regularly, so I see them in these Rivian
Yeah.
products. So if they, Arrival left the market, that was the UPS truck. So now, Rivian has the opportunity to sell into others. So, and they're really, frankly, the best place. Commercial vehicle, quick 50 mile a day radius drop off makes
Mhm.
it much more viable.
Awesome. Well, Laurie, you are a little bit of a fortune teller because Justin has a question that kind of falls into that area. How are you seeing design domains impact EV and autonomous vehicles? Are you seeing specific use cases coming down the road for, say, automated delivery trucks for shipping companies, UPS, food and perishables, also with buses and taxis? Is there an opportunity for a drop cost refocus of resources as far as delivery vehicles with EV and autonomous vehicles?
Yes, and there's a lot of research going on in that space from some folks I have talked to in the
Mm,
last 6 months or so. Just to be able to they've started, Amazon had started in sort of that um, small autonomous unit where they would, I mean, I know of people who live in neighborhoods where they drop off this unit, it goes around the block and stops, it sends a message, hey, your package is outside, like that kind of thing. Not huge penetration, but they started in that space and now looking, of course, forward into, I mean, obviously Slate is got some element of focus in that regard too.
mm,
So I do see a lot of R&D in that space. We're seeing it in less of we're seeing it in other areas that are not automotive. So I'm from Detroit, so now I see
mm.
wheelchairs that are autonomous
Okay.
in all over the airport. And it's not just a little. I mean, I see them plentifully, and people are using them in hospitals. There's a lot of these autonomous carts that are delivering medication, and then the nurse comes out and grabs it and takes what they need. So the R&D and the development is there, and there's no better place for that autonomous to start than in that delivery mechanism. The challenge is you got to get it off the truck if it's autonomous, right? So
Yeah.
I could have a robot, but where's that robot going to leave that package and so on and so on? Seems not so significant, but they'll figure that out too, right? So yes, I think that
Mhm.
some of that focus shifting there, at least if we can make hybrids and get people more excited. So that's a little bit of the bridging the chasm I'm talking about.
Gotcha. And James wants to know with multiple OEMs like Ford, Tesla, Slate claiming to launch a BEV at the 2000 or sorry, 20,000, 30,000 price point over the last 5 years. None of them have come close. Do you feel confident that Ford or Slate will actually be able to meet this goal?
I haven't seen it yet, and I'm a little hesitant to say that they will. Now, will they be 30,000 over? Probably not, right? The manufacturing cost of that vehicle and the labor that goes into it is one component of the total cost of
Right.
the product, right?
Yeah.
The biggest portion of the invention of an automobile is material cost.
Mm,
So when I look at, again, let's pick a super high content vehicle, a Jeep Wagoneer. The material cost, the content on that product is so high because I have so many features and very expensive features. TV screens in the back seat, and they have the thing in the front seat, like all the content that takes the material cost up. If I if I now go look at a Tesla, right? I got one instrument panel, I got one bumper fascia, I don't have any buttons or knobs, I hit a screen. So now I can start to bring down the cost of material into the product.
mhm.
Tesla did fabulous job of that when they started out, right? Now they had all kinds of other reasons they didn't make money, but if the OEMs are able to bring a vehicle, remember the Maverick was one of Ford's targets and they hit it pretty close, a low cost hybrid truck.
Yeah.
If they can take that and make that a BEV under a new manufacturing system, I think they can get close. What I don't want, what I struggle with, because remember I'm a manufacturing rat, is that manufacturing cost is not the biggest portion of making a vehicle. So I'm taking cost out. I get it. It will help in capital, but I still have to reduce content and make sure that I can make that less trim levels. Remember, we grew trim levels in the mid 2000, like 2014, 15, 16, going
Mhm.
after chasing a millennial who wanted everything their own. They didn't want it to look like somebody's next to
Right.
them.
Yeah.
That drove the cost of our car. So now we've got to bring that trim level down, keep the high level trims for those who have the money to buy it, and then make an affordable vehicle. So if we can do that, which has not been something traditional OEMs have been able to stray away from.
Mhm.
If we can do it, we'll get there. But I think it's going to take a couple rounds.
Awesome. Well, Laurie, that just about wraps things up today. If you wanted to let people know when they can expect the latest report from you guys, I know that is something that is coming up, correct? Or you guys had just published?
We are, I think we are a week, maybe 10 days away
Okay.
from our press release and our webinar for those who participated in the study. Anybody who has questions about that, I left my email and phone number here up on the screen, and Jake will get you guys this
Mhm.
presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions for that. There'll be some media and a press release about it here in a couple weeks. So very, very interesting times for us, and frankly, not all doom and gloom. This market will return as we move into the next year. So
Awesome. So once again, she is Laurie Harbour, a partner at Wipfli. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and your insight today.
thank you, appreciate it.
You can listen to all of our episodes of Manufacturing Matters and Lunch and Learn podcast from the MFG Radio Network on Spotify, Apple Music, and on our websites, today'smedicaldevelopments.com, aerospacemanufacturinganddesign.com, defenseandmunitions.com, and evdesignandmanufacturing.com.